Welcome to the Backfield Buzz podcast, a part of the Hive Podcast Network. As always, Cody Wiles, Logan Glover, and Andrew Foster here, keeping you up to date with all things NFL. And if you wanted to stay in the know on the National Football League, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. It would mean a lot to us to help continue grow the channel and provide better content for you guys. All right, fellas, today we are looking at the NFC East division. We've already rounded up the NFC North, so if you want to hear our thoughts on that division, you can go check out that video as well. But before we get into anything, Glover, how you doing?
It's a good day. I mean, spent last night, had some good times watching the NHL draft, some chaos this morning in the NHL, so that was good catching up. And now ready to preview some more of the NFL season because we're only a few months out. So
Ed Frosty, everyone's seen that you got the Cowboys hat on. You've been
right.
particularly excited to talk about this division. It's one that you keep a closer eye on. How are you doing?
Uh, I am excited. I was looking forward to this episode more than any other one, I think, in this division preview series. So I'm excited. I'm not quite as excited about my own team as we'll hear later on in the video. But yeah, I'm really excited. I think this is one of the most competitive divisions in football.
Interesting. All right, well, we'll get to those Cowboys in a little bit, but I want to start with the Washington Commanders because we talked about the number one overall pick last week in Caleb Williams, and now we get to talk about the second overall pick, Jaden Daniels, and this new look offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jay Daniels was a good pick, and they look solid on the offensive side. It's just there's not a lot of depth I've found looking at this team. Like Eckler's solid. I'm curious how he'll perform in Washington. He's so up and down, so hit or miss. He seems like he might be starting to lose a step at his age, so we'll see if that lasts. They do have Brian Robinson behind him. I like that. But the receivers has been an issue for years, and beyond McLaurin, Jahan Dotson's fine, but he's not moving me a ton. And Luke McCaffrey's okay, but that's a fourth round pick who's your third string receiver with no help behind him. You got a 30 some odd old Zach Ertz at tight end. The O line is still a massive question mark. So Jane Daniels is going to be running quite a bit. So the offense is definitely the sketchy part of this team for me.
Yeah, and I think them hiring Dan Quinn is not the best option for them, honestly. Like I liked their defense already in the first place. I really did. I thought their defense was underrated last year, going into last season and all through last season. It didn't perform the greatest, but it's also hard when you have the league leader in interceptions on your team. Your defense is on the field for over half the game every single time you're on the field. So this offense, that, like you said, we saw Jaden Daniels' athleticism at LSU. We're going to have to see it again because this O-line, he's going to be running for his life. I'd say at least once on every set of downs that this team has this season. So it's going to be tough. And I'm with you on the Austin Eckler. I don't know if that's an upgrade over Antonio Gibson. I really don't know at this point in his career if that's much of an upgrade over him at this point.
Yeah. And the Jane Daniels, the situation he's in is eerily similar to Robert Griffin III. Second overall pick, Heisman winner, goes to a poor team with no real offensive help, no O-line help, no real weapons for him to go. They had a couple good receivers like McLaurin or Dotson for Jane Daniels, but it really I'm hoping history does not repeat itself because it would be such a shame to see Jane Daniels go down early in his career and just struggle with injuries the way RG3 did back in his day. If the Commanders are serious about this rebuild, they need to start addressing the O-line soon.
Yeah, I think the O-line is definitely a point of concern, but outside of that, I'm actually a bit higher on just the offense that's around them. Well, first of all, they brought in a new OC, Cliff Kingsbury. Mixed opinions on him as well, but with somebody like Jaden Daniels at the quarterback position, I feel like they're gonna be able to get really creative with him. They're obviously, you guys have been talking about, let him run, let him really use his speed and athleticism, which is part of the reason they took him second overall. I like Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson as a 1-2 punch. I think both of them can take carries and take the load off. And I like the Zach Ertz pickup too. I know he's older, but they're just adding veterans around Jaden Daniels. And I actually really like the receiving core. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, I feel like, are two of the more underrated receivers in the league. And then you supplement that with, maybe Luke McCaffrey isn't you don't know what you're going to expect from him. De'Ami Brown, Zacchaeus. There's Demir Bird. There's like other options in there, but yeah, it's still a Commanders offense that is clearly still working through the fine tune of things. But I think there's worse situations out there.
Oh yeah.
There's
Oh yeah.
absolutely worse situations. Like, yeah, no doubt there. But it's like you mentioned Zach Ertz, and Zach Ertz is old and he's getting injury prone. He's starting to get beat up a lot. Their backup tight end's Ben Sinnott.
I
That's
will say the one good thing, the one thing I like about the Zach Ertz signing is he's going to be able to mentor Ben Sinnott. He was
oh
like,
yeah.
he's a second round pick. It's not like this guy's like some nobody coming out of like North Dakota State for like that nobody's ever heard of before. Like he's a second round pick. He's a guy that should have at least a decently high ceiling for them as long as they can find a way to utilize him properly.
Yeah, I think Clint Kingsbury will do a good job. I think for Kingsbury, it's about tailoring this offense to Jane Daniels' strengths and the offense's weaknesses. It's a lot. It's going to have to be similar to what Greg Roman did with the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. You have to build the offense around his strengths. You have to build the offense around your run game and kind of find a way to avoid the weakness of your O line, which would be a lot of play actions, RPOs, getting the ball moving so that you're moving away from the O line and not getting just stuck in the pocket.
Let's move over to the defense where it's another interesting defense. Like they have tried to bring in veterans all along this team. Obviously we're talking about Eckler, bringing in Bobby Wagner, bringing in Frankie Louvu. So they're wanting to really supplement and really try to take a step in this NFC East division. What do we make of the defense, guys?
I like it. I like their D line. I think Dorrance Armstrong is very good. I think he's going to be a great piece on their edge. I like Jonathan Allen a lot. He's one of the best interior presences, I think, at least in the NFC, if not in the entire NFL. Jeremy Chin, I like at safety. I'm not the biggest fan of Bobby Wagner being there. I don't love him. I think his coverage skills are pretty much gone now. Essentially, he's pretty much he reminds me a lot of Von Miller on the Bills at this point. He just doesn't have the foot speed to keep up with guys anymore. Even tight ends in the league at this point. Like I'm not the biggest fan of that, but I'm a big fan of their D line.
Yeah, I think the D line has always been their strength, and even though they moved off Chase Young and Montez Sweat, it's still a strength for this defense. I may have underrated a little bit when going to my predictions. Like I don't have them doing as well as this defense may seem, but I do like what they were trying to do. Like Frankie Louvu should be a solid pickup. I do like the potential there in Jamin Davis. Maybe a guy like Bobby Wagner can mentor him and improve him in that way. That way you don't have to rely on Wagner. But the secondary is really questionable. Emmanuel Forbes to me was a rough pick when it happened. It was a bit of a reach, especially with the quarterbacks that were on the board. I mean, you still had Christian Gonzalez, who, in my opinion, should have got so much earlier. But Forbes had a really rough rookie year. And the concern he always had was his size, and he seems to have gotten even smaller this like offseason. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the photos going around, but he makes me look kind of big, and that's not good. I am not a big guy. I'm not gonna move you there, but he doesn't have any muscle. He needs to build some muscle, some strength, so he can handle these elite receivers at the NFL level, especially as the cornerback one on this defense. So a lot to me on him. The Canadian Benjamin St. Just, he's solid. I do like his game, but you can't just rely on those guys, and there's not much depth behind them.
Yeah, there's young pieces though along this defense like you guys have been talking about Forbes still young, obviously he's going into year 2, so you can't write him off yet. I like Mike Sanders still, their second round pick, I believe out of Michigan. um he looks like he's maybe going to slot in the nickel for them, maybe some safety. We'll see where he ends up going. And Johnny Newton fell to them in the second round. There was concerns about just some other stuff with Newton that we don't have to get into, but that's somebody who, like Glover, you mentioned, the D line has been probably the strength of this Commanders defense and the calling card over the years. It just gets the interior just gets even stronger with him there. And I didn't mind the free agent pickups they made on this defense. Like you said, Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler Jr., a couple of ex-Cowboys coming in there. Farrell looks like he's probably going to be starting at the other end. We'll see. But like I said, I think there's worse situations out there. We'll get to the standings predictions in a little bit. I have Washington being a bit better than maybe some people think, but I've also been a bit higher on Jaden Daniels. So we will see because he can throw that thing, man. The combination of him and Scary Terry, like I could, and Jahan Dotson just getting it behind defenses, like I could see some Cliff Kingsbury magic there. No,
If
I
Kingsbury
do
was
think
magic, yeah.
I think Jahan Dotson's one of the most underrated wide receiver twos in the league. I do agree with you. He's a threat. He's a legit threat. And if teams don't realize that he's a legit threat, he's gonna burn people like crazy. You really this offense, it might on paper look like you just double team Terry every single time and you're fine. But there's more weapons on this offense than you'd think at this point. And I think we could see Jahan Dotson have a really big year if teams don't game plan for him a little bit more than they did.
I'm not as high on Jahan Dawson as you guys are, but for me, the big thing will be if Kingsbury can work his magic to create a good offense. Terry McLaurin, this is probably the best quarterback he's played with in his career. If Daniels comes out and plays as expected, it's tough to say that Daniels is not a better quarterback than Alex Smith during his time in Washington or Taylor Heineke or Sam Howell. Like Jaden Daniels is the most talented for sure. And if that talent translates quickly, it'll be the best quarterback McLaurin has ever seen. And he's had a rough string of quarterbacks for his career and still put up really good numbers.
all right, let's head to New York now to talk about the New York Giants, where I think it's a pretty solid team over there, but they still have Daniel Jones at quarterback. Frosty, what?
I don't like this team. I don't really like anything about this team to be,
Okay.
to be completely honest with you. To me, I don't understand how you let Saquon Barkley leave your team. With the offense that they are putting out on the field, Saquon left. That's their offense. He's gone. I don't see how they're going to move the ball this year. Daniel Jones. To begin with, I don't like Daniel Jones as a quarterback. I don't think he's a starting caliber quarterback, and he's on a massive contract. And their O line, I don't like it. They were bad last year. I think they'll get a little bit better this year. Andrew Thomas, if he can stay healthy, will help a ton. I like John Michael Schmidt still. I think he's got a shot to improve once he get a little bit more acclimated. But man, Dan, like I can't put my stock into an offense led by Daniel Jones. I just can't do it.
And you're not wrong. I mean, you hit on the head there where I was like, the team looks decent in places, but it's Daniel Jones. You get to count on Daniel Jones, really? Like, I like what Joe Shane has tried to do with this team, and he's made some really good moves. But the most mind-boggling thing is you have Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones both up for contract extensions after career years, and you go, yeah, let's sign Daniel Jones, the guy who's been pretty much unplayable at times, to a $40 million contract, not the running back who has had injury concerns, but when healthy is one of the best in the league. Like the only issue with Saquon was the fact that when they didn't have him, they weren't very good because he was injured a lot. But Daniel Jones, when he's healthy, just sucks. He's just not good. I watch him. I'm like, what are you throwing? There's no thought process. He's so nervous in the pocket. He's got great athleticism, but oh my God, I don't. Daniel Jones was made by Saquon Barkley. Defenses sold out for the run, so Saquon was taken away. Daniel Jones can just throw it, and it was easier for him that way. But I can't bet on a team that has Daniel Jones. I just can't do it.
No, and you mentioned that he looked nervous in the pocket, possibly because they gave up 85 sacks last year.
Yep, also true.
Could have something to do with it. Yep. Like their quarterbacks just get absolutely tormented in the pocket behind this offensive line. It was abysmal. Easily, to me, the worst offensive line in football last year. I think it'll be better, but I don't know how much that helps you. Devin Singletary is such a downgrade.
Oh yeah.
From really the only part of your offense that looked competent last season.
Yeah, it's like Daniel Jones does have talent. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
He is a starting caliber quarterback, and if, in my opinion, he maybe struggles to push the ball down the field, and like you said, maybe jitters in the pocket, but he's had one of the worst O-lines in football since he's got there. The receiving core hasn't been like, this is arguably, I mean, I'm high on this receiving core. I think it's one of the better ones he's ever had. Malik Neighbors' first round pick coming in there now. I like the speed and explosiveness of Jalen Hyatt. I also really like Wan'Dale Robinson. Then you supplement that with Allen Robinson coming in. Darius Slayton is still there. So I think there's, not to mention the tight ends, Daniel Bellinger and Canadian athletic monster Theo Johnson is now there as well. I think he's a bit of a sleeper, but there's a lot around. I think other than the O line, Andrew Thomas is one of the best tackles in the league, and just struggles to stay healthy. I like Schmitz, Runyon's an all right guard, and then Evan Neal's still maybe working through it. I think there's potential here for the Giants. I really do. I don't know how not I don't know how smart of it was to hitch your wagon to Daniel Jones, regardless, but I do think there's potential here.
Agreed. There's definitely potential. Like I like some of the young pieces, but the execution just hasn't been there for years. Like I loved Evan Neal coming out of the draft. Athletic freak, was a dog at Alabama. He was just terrible last year. Flat out wasn't good at anything. Andrew Thomas is amazing if healthy. I like John Michael Schmitz, as you mentioned. John Runyon's fine. But if they get beat up with injuries again, the depth isn't there on this O line. They don't have backups at these positions that are competent, or you've heard them play before. These guys, they need to stay healthy. They're another team where if injuries come to bite them, as it has in the past with the Giants, this team can fall apart in a second.
Yeah, I agree. Also, like, there is potential. There is, but they need essentially every single person on this offense to take a pretty large step forward. And there's just not enough guys on this team that I think will. I do like Wan'Dale Robinson, like you mentioned, Cody. I think he's a very underrated wide receiver. I'm not as big on Jalen Hyatt as you are. I don't really see him as much of anything but a deep ball threat. And I do like Malik Neighbors. That's probably the best receiver that Daniel Jones is going to be able to throw to.
Yeah.
And that in his time on New York. So it's not saying much. The bar is pretty low, but he's going to be the best receiver that he's got.
The bar is Kenny Golladay, so I mean it is pretty low.
And not Lions Kenny Golladay. Lions Kenny Golladay was a different animal.
Giants Kenny Golladay, 0 touchdowns and $17 million Kenny Golladay.
And I do want to say I did watch a lot of Devin Singletary last year. Obviously a downgrade compared to Saquon, but he single-handedly saved the Texans running game this past season. So there is a little like he's a starting caliber back in the league. I have no doubt about that. I just don't know how much he's gonna elevate an offense, especially when your quarterback tends to like lean on the running game a little bit. But regardless of what you think about this offense, it's probably the strength of the team. No, because now we can talk about the defense, where I think there's more question marks here than on the offense. Is that just me?
I don't know if there's more question marks. I think there's more exclamation marks on the defense than there is on the offense, because there's just guys that I don't think have a step forward in them on the defense.
Because I love the D line. I think this is one of the most solid D lines in all of football. But outside of that, you're grasping for straws here a little bit.
Looking at this defensive roster, it's real like it's either a stud, like a great player, or someone that you're questioning how they're starting on an NFL team. Like you've got Brian Burns, amazing. Kayvon Thibodeau's been great. Dexter Lawrence is great. I liked Deontay Banks last year. Bobby Okereke is really solid. And then, your second cornerback is Cordell Flott. Your starting free safety is Jason Pinnock. Where there's no balance. There's no balance. It's 4 elite players and a bunch of guys that are just meh. If that.
I completely agree. The one thing that gives me a little bit of hope was Shane Bowen said he wants a free-flowing defense this year. He wants guys to think less and just react more. And the guy that actually excites me for is Isaiah Simmons. Because I think if he can get back to the way he was at Clemson and just get back to his roots, get out of his own head, stop trying to memorize absolutely everything and just rely on his football instincts. He was an 8th overall pick. He was a top 10 guy for a reason. Like, this guy was one of the best linebackers that I've watched in college. And he looks lost on an NFL field. And I think maybe just getting him back to just basic football instincts, do what you see on the field, maybe that'll help him get himself back into a groove again.
And he's got potential to make a real impact, because he can easily take the spot of Micah McFadden in the middle. There's no reason he can't if his athleticism comes through on the field, which is what he was an athletic freak at Clemson. He was good at everything, and then it got the NFL and it all fell apart. So I'm interested to see what Isaiah Simmons can do.
Yeah, this team definitely is really needing their young guys to take steps up all over this roster, right? Like you want to see Evan Neal come out and just really assert himself. Jalen Hyatt, like we mentioned, take another step. Wandale Robinson take a step. And then on the defense, like they got some young guys in the secondary who they drafted this past draft, and Tyler Newman and Drew Phillips, who you're hoping can come in and provide good snaps. So we'll see where we have where we got these guys ranked in our when we get to the standings a bit later. I'm trying to gauge what you guys are thinking on this. I feel like I'm a bit higher on them as well. Um, but let's move over to, I think there's a bit of a divide in this division. You got the first two we talked about, and then we can move into maybe the upper echelon of teams. Let's go to Philly, where we all know the story about them last year, right? Started 10-1, finished 1-5, eventually losing in the first round. One of the more polarizing teams in the NFL, and how good they actually are. So Glover, how good are they?
They're good. They should be good. They did lose a lot of big pieces this offseason. It was a very tumultuous offseason for Philly.
There's a
Lost
lot of turnover.
Oh yeah, lost a lot of pieces, but also gained a lot of pieces. Signed some massive deals. I mean, they locked up AJ Brown and Devontae Smith long term. But then your franchise center for the last 10 years retires. Your franchise D tackle for the last 10 years retires. You lose a lot of pieces in your secondary and your pass rush. But they did a really solid job of filling those holes after they were created. Bryce Huff was a great addition. I think Cam Jurgens was a planned ahead. You knew Kelsey was gone for a while, so now Jurgens will play center for them. They went out and got Saquon Barkley and from a division rival. They brought back CJ Gardner-Johnson. Might have had the best draft through the first couple rounds. They hit out of the park with Quinny Mitchell and oh my God,
Cooper DeJean.
Cooper DeJean, thank you. Yeah, Cooper DeJean and Quinny Mitchell too will be great there. So I do really think, I don't think Philly got worse, but they didn't do a ton to get a lot better because they lost so much in the process.
I think what's going to be the difference for this team is they're different now. I think Saquon Barkley is a massive upgrade over DeAndre Swift. I don't like DeAndre Swift, as I don't think he's that good of a running back. I think he was made by this Eagles O-line. And if this Eagles O-line could do that for DeAndre Swift, we saw what Saquon Barkley did in the Giants O-line. This guy could absolutely go crazy behind this. He's running behind Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson as his tackles. Every outside run, he's getting 3 yards before contact. And it's Saquon Barkley. So he's getting another 2 after contact too. Like this, it just really looks like I'm pretty low on Jalen Hurts. It sounds like I'm just dogging on the quarterbacks that aren't Dallas Cowboys in this division. But I'm also not high on Jalen Hurts. But I think Saquon Barkley is going to help him a ton, because with how good this O-line is, teams are going to have to sell out to stop Saquon. And I think that's going to open up alleys for Jalen Hurts. He's not going to have as many guys dropping off into coverage as they saw at the end of the year last year. So I think this offense is going to take a step back to where they were at the start of last season.
Okay. I think shocker, this team is going to go as far as the quarterback takes them. I mean, that's not anything new, but it's interesting when you look at the Jalen Hurts conversation, because I feel like people are all over the map on this guy. I feel like at least coming into last year, he was like an MVP candidate. I mean, throughout the year, he was an MVP candidate as well. But now as we head into this year, I think there's a lot more divide in what Hurts could really do. But the O-line's taken a step down. It's still really good, but just with the big loss of Kelsey, there is some question marks in the interior. I think the tackles are solid. I mean, it's kind of crazy to expect Lane Johnson to keep playing at the level he's been playing at. So you got to think he's going to regress at some point, whether it's this year or not. So I feel like the O-line, it's worse than last year. It's still good. It's worse though. If Saquon stays healthy, obviously that run game, it would be much improved, especially with Hurts back there as well, being dynamic. I like the rookie Will Shipley. He's somebody that I love this Eagles draft, honestly. Like I was super high on Shipley, and then those 2 DBs that Glover brought up, and Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who we'll get to in a little bit. This receiving core is interesting because it's Devontae Smith and AJ Brown, and then you're looking at Paris Campbell. Do you guys think the receiving core is like, is it a Super Bowl winning caliber unit?
No, I don't think it is. I
Can be. It takes a lot of hurt. Like Hurts has to bring it up. I think if you have two elite receivers, you can win a Super Bowl with that room. But it isn't going to be easy. It's going to be a lot on Hurts to make them all better.
I, I think there's I think there's too much attitude in that receiving room. Devontae Smith and AJ Brown both, they every single time that it seems like they get below 100 yards and 8 targets a game, they're upset and saying something in a press conference after the game. And it goes back and forth between each one of them. It seems like every week that Jalen Hurts doesn't throw for 350 yards. I
Yeah.
just I'm not in love with it. I don't hate Paris Campbell. I'm not the biggest Paris Campbell guy, but as a three, like he's fine as a three, especially when you have two dogs at 1 and 2. Like I'm not going to deny the skill there. The skill is all there with those two. What scares me is the attitude, and I'm not convinced that they'll be able on a deep playoff run to coexist together without creating drama within that locker room.
Here's the thing, though. Is there a like? There's maybe one or two top tier receivers in the league these days that aren't drama queens. Like they all are like that. Like you look at Stephon Diggs last year, he's the same way. He's the receiver one on an elite football team. He doesn't get his targets and he throws a fit on the sideline. Like they're all like that is probably part of the reason why the receivers market goes up so much higher than like the cornerback market. That's always a big topic of discussion, is the fact that corners and receivers, the scaling has just been crazy different the past couple of years. Receivers are a lot harder to keep happy. It's really hard to keep a receiver happy. I mean, look at Brandon Ayuk this offseason. All he's doing is just spreading all sorts of rumors, just sparking it up. Look, I'm hanging out with Jaden Daniels. Hey, ESPN, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, that's what receivers do. So I think you have to look past that and just hope that when the push comes to shove, they'll get their head on straight. But that's just the receivers these days.
And I think with the talk about the receiving core, I think they're going to be supplemented by the tight ends, which they got a couple of really good tight ends in Dallas Goedert, the young Grant Calcaterra, who's continued to take steps, and then they just brought in CJ Uzoma. So I think the lack of maybe receivers outside of the top two can maybe be supplemented by some more two tight end looks, which is something they like. So we'll see. The offense has kind of been the calling card to some degree, especially last year when the defense, especially towards the second half, just they couldn't stop anybody. And it was big time because of the secondary. The secondary just absolutely let them down. We already kind of talked about them bringing in Mitchell and DeJean now to kind of supplement. But I want to start in these defensive backs, because this was, you could argue, one of the worst in football to close the year, and now they've really tried to address it.
Yeah, I think that definitely the defense, they went through a lot of changes because it wasn't working. But the biggest changes is the same thing that goes for the offense too, was the new coordinators. They lost Sirianni, or not Sirianni. They lost Steichen and they lost Gannon in the same offseason. And the new coordinator, Brian Johnson and Sean Desai, looked lost. The team just looked out of sync. You now bring in Kellen Moore, who's run some elite offenses, and Vic Fangio is one of the best defensive coordinators in NFL history. He runs some of the best defenses you can imagine. So I do think that will definitely help both sides of the ball improve. And this defense is going through a lot of changes. One thing the Eagles always tend to do is they draft for the future. They draft going, we know these guys are going to be leaving in a couple of years. Let's draft and develop these raw prospects. And then when these guys leave, they'll be ready to come in. And that's what they have. Fletcher Cox left, but Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter are ready to go. Those two are going to destroy the interior. It's going to be insane what they do together. Bryce Huff was a great replacement for Hassan Reddick, who fell off last year. And Quinny Mitchell and Cooper DeJean are your replacements, so to speak, to try and fill the hole left by Bradbury's fall off and when Slay takes a hit. So it's a lot of, as you lose pieces, you already have the pieces in your system that are ready and comfortable to improve.
Yeah, to me, there's just too many playmakers on this defense for Vic Fangio to not find success with it. There's too many guys that are just great at what they do. You mentioned Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, one of the best 1-2 punches up front in the NFL. As much as I hate to say that, It is. And they were both great draft picks when they made them. I think Quinion Mitchell could be their quarterback one. I'm so high on Quinion Mitchell. I love his game. Wherever they play Cooper DeJean, there's a lot of talk of him being a nickel. There's a lot of talk about him possibly coming in at safety,
He's
or if
not
he's at
playing on the
corner.
outside. I'm sorry for anybody who wants him to play on the outside. His
Ah,
set
man.
is just better suited to play inside. It's not even about an athleticism question mark. It's just that he's really good at stopping the run, and he just plays better in the middle of the field. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's what's gonna
Yeah,
happen.
You bring up the
I
athleticism,
do.
man.
I do think that's where he'll end up playing. Realistically, I think he'll probably be a slot corner. If anything, that's the most likely place that I probably see him going. But like, I'm the only. I really don't love this linebacking core. I don't know if I'm on an island by myself when I say that, but I'm not the highest on here. I like Bryce Huff, not the greatest. Like, I like Josh Sweat, not the greatest. I do like Devin White. I think Devin White's going to be the catalyst to this linebacker room, but I'm not in love with it. But if their secondary can shore up what they just seem to lose all of a sudden at the end of last year, they just couldn't cover a parked car. If they can kind of figure themselves out now, and I think these additions will help, their defense should be fine. And like Logan, you mentioned it, Vic Fangio's he will find success here.
And you mentioned linebackers. I am very high on Nakobe Dean. I love Nakobe Dean coming out of Georgia in his draft year. He fell due to some medical concerns, but I was in love with this pick when the Eagles made it. So I think he can be huge enough because he hasn't played. He hasn't had a lot of playing time as a starter so far in his career. So it'd be interesting to see what he does with more playing time. And I do think Cooper DeJean, I think a good sort of comparable roles. He'll play similar to what Brian Branch did in Detroit. Just kind of go all over the field wherever he's needed because they do have two safeties. They have CJ Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship who are both solid. They do have a lot of cornerback depth, so he'll really just go wherever he's needed. He'll play all over the field, but he will likely probably slot in more on the back end.
They need the young guys to step up on defense. I think it's a lot of projection right now and not necessarily what they've done. Like, I just want to start with Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. They struggled at points to just stay on the field, not necessarily because of injuries, it was just because of conditioning to some degree. And they just later in games, their impact wasn't really felt and they weren't helping out that secondary. There was no uh like the pass rush wasn't there as well at some points. Like we'll see what Bryce Huff and Josh Sweat can bring. You're hoping Nolan Smith takes another step. It's like it's Nakobe Dean hasn't. You like him coming out. You like all these Georgia guys coming out, but the play on the field necessarily hasn't been there. But there's lots of potential all over the place, right? So if these guys are all able to take a step, and then you got these rookies coming in now as well, it can look scary. But I don't think the actual production necessarily has been there. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with that.
not yet.
I do think that's pretty much what happened. But there's a bunch of talent. They just have to put it together.
Yeah. And the talent is definitely there. I mean, we saw what Jalen Carter did last year's rookie. He had 9.5 sacks. He was in a defensive rookie of the year candidate. Jordan Davis, I think, yeah, both of them are going to have to stay on the field more because they're not going to have as much time off the field with a couple of the big losses they had.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of edge rushers that I think, like a guy like Brandon Graham's listed as an edge rusher on the depth chart. He'll probably slot to the interior at times. Like I think they'll move him around, but he is kind of old, so who knows what he's going to bring to you. So there are question marks, but again, if the players play for the potential they have, it should be good.
Last but not least, the Dallas Cowboys. For anyone who doesn't know, Frosty is a Cowboys fan. So, Glover, let's just hands off the wheel. Let's hear your thoughts on underwhelming offseason. Is that fair to say?
I don't think it is fair because I think underwhelming is a compliment. This was an absolute disaster class by Jerry Jones. This offseason, it was terrible. It like just plain cut and dry. It's terrible. You don't have a running back anymore. Ezekiel Elliott has lost every bit of explosiveness that he had. When you're letting Tony Pollard walk, the guy that was supposed to replace Ezekiel Elliott in the first place because he was more explosive, you just let him walk and bring back Ezekiel Elliott, the washed guy that you let walk from your team in the first place. The O-line has been completely depleted. When this team had success, they built it around their O-line. The O-line's gone. It's it's Zach Martin, Tyler Smith. I like the guards. I do like the Tyler Guyton pick. I think he's going to be great, but Terrence Steele was an absolute mess at right tackle last year. I think the only time this guy didn't give up a sack was when he took a penalty. It was just absolutely terrible. I liked Badash as our center. Didn't bring him back either. I don't hate Brock
Was in a
Hoffman.
division rival. He's at a division rival now in Washington. So
Exactly. Like, I don't hate Brock Hoffman, but I'd rather have Badash there. It's this offense. I don't think it's going to be even close to as explosive as it was last year, because if Dak Prescott's not going to have the time. He's just simply not going to have time, because at least two guys are probably getting through almost every play, because Terrence Steele is pretty much, you basically have to double team Zach Martin with Terrence Steele to get a block on any above average edge rusher. And you're in the NFC. You're going to be playing division winners because you won the division. Like, this is an absolute mess. Like, it's this team, it's gone downhill very quickly. I will say that.
My favorite part about this whole underwhelming offseason is it all started with, after the season, an interview with Jerry Jones where he went, "We're going to go all in. We're ready to go all in. You got to win with this team now." And he comes back 3 months later after making 0 signings and going, "That's not how I define all in. I define all in by," I don't even remember what he said, but it was the most just like, it was so just a blatant lie. He just missed on every free agent he wanted. He fell asleep when free agency started and woke up and was like, "Oh, I missed all the free agents." Like, oh my God. This team's not in a great spot. Really, they needed to make a lot of moves, had a lot of upcoming free agents, and did nothing with it, really. Like, they just didn't do anything, and we'll see how it goes.
They signed 3 guys in free agency. 2 of them were running backs. And the other one was Eric Kendricks.
Two running backs were both backups last year too.
Exactly. Like, I'm at a loss for words as to how Jerry Jones doesn't think that he needs a general manager on this team. I understand you're the owner, and I think it's a pride thing that he doesn't want to let anybody else control the team. He wants to have control of it because he's built Super Bowl contenders before. You lost it, dude. You lost it. He clearly, he's either lost the ability to negotiate with free agents, and Dallas is no longer a desirable place for free agents to come play, or he's putting, I believe, too much faith in the guys that are already on this team, because they couldn't get past the wild card round last year with, to me, a better team, a better O-line, a better run game, and a better defense. It blows my mind that, if anything, they did nothing to improve this offseason at all, and it's crazy to me.
I think he's also putting too much faith in the fact that players will be like, "Well, the Cowboys are the Cowboys. Obviously, I want to sign there." Like, he's putting too much faith in that just name value of,
Yeah.
"We're the biggest franchise. You must want to come here. I don't need to offer you anything more. You'll just come here because we're good."
Yeah. It's America's team, right?
It's not 1990 anymore. You're gonna have to do it.
okay, it's been a lot of negativity being spread around here. Let's look at some of the positives. You got a top 3 receiver in the league. CeeDee Lamb is fantastic. So if the offense is gonna be something and it's gonna be really good, it's gonna be because CeeDee Lamb takes yet another jump to where you're looking at him as one of the best, or like the best receiver in the league. Like, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for him next year, just based on the trajectory that he's faced. I want to hear your opinion on where do you think Brandon Cooks is at during his career right now. I don't mind Jalen Tolbert. Turpin has shown some nice things. Where are you at with the weapons around Dak Prescott before maybe we get into Dak Prescott?
So I agree on the CeeDee Lamb front. I think he's a top 3 receiver in the league. I think he's got the talent to be the best receiver in the league. It scares me that Brandon Cooks took a bit of a step back last year, because that makes me think he's going to take more of a step back this year. I do like what Jalen Tolbert showed last year, though. He took a massive step forward. There was the second game against the Eagles when the Cowboys put up 44 points on them. Jalen Tolbert was torching Darius Slay in man coverage. They left him on an island against Jalen Tolbert, and he was winning that matchup. And just seeing if he can go out and do that, Brandon Cooks becomes a 3. And if he drops down from the 800 yards back to like 600, 500, you can live with that if Jalen Tolbert takes a step up, or else you're relying on CeeDee Lamb to go superhuman. And if this offense is anywhere close to what it was last year, I think CeeDee Lamb wins Offensive Player of the Year.
I know you, well, I just wanted to touch on some positive things, but the problem with this team right now is you can't touch on the positives, and there's everything that is positive, there's a negative that goes along with it. I mean, the three biggest positives for this team after last year, Micah Parsons is arguably the best defensive player in football. CeeDee Lamb is arguably a top 3 receiver in football, and Dak Prescott had an amazing season. The negative for all three of those guys, they all need contract extensions. And they're gonna get paid. And if you don't build around the rest of them, it's just it's not a long-term solution for this team. They can be good now, but once those contracts come up, it's gonna be rough, especially with this team already having holes. And those holes aren't gonna go away, especially when you now have to dish out probably a combined 150 million to 200 million for those three guys. It's going to be not a great spot, but for this upcoming season, it should be a great duo between CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott if they're on the same page. It took them they were a little out of sync at times last year, but if they're in sync, they should be a great duo for the Cowboys.
Yeah, and it's looking like it's going to be a running back by committee approach. Like you could realistically give carries to Zeke, Rico Dowdle, Royce Freeman, Deuce Vaughn. Like realistically, all 4 of those guys could get carries. So, maybe if you're looking glass half full to some degree, could breed some competition in camp, and maybe somebody emerges. Like maybe Rico Dowdle takes a step. We haven't been touching much on this defense here. Frosty, just your overall thoughts, because Glover kind of summed it up kind of nicely there. Micah Parsons, one of the best defenders in football. DeMarcus Lawrence is still doing good things off the edge. Deron Bland was a surprise to everybody in the league with what he did last season. Where are you at with this defense?
I one of my favorite parts of this defense is Osa Odigizua. I probably butchered that.
I don't think you did. I think you actually got those.
Nice.
That's what I think it is. I maybe butchered it, but that's what it sounded right.
And what I like about it is he's the interior rusher on Micah Parsons' side almost every single play. If Micah Parsons switches to the left side edge, he will switch over to that side of the interior D line. And every single time, because you have to double team Micah Parsons. The majority of the time, Osa will win one-on-one battles, especially against the run. Because if there's one thing that Mozzie Smith, who was our first round pick last year, could not do, it was stop the run. When teams were in a first and 10 scenario, they couldn't put Mozzie Smith on the field because a team would just run the ball directly at him, and it would be a guaranteed at least 4 yards. Having a guy like Osa there that can kind of offset that a little bit and basically force you to run at a guy, you can stack a linebacker behind him. You can sandwich DeMarcus Lawrence a little bit closer to him on that side of the line and maybe offset it a little bit. I think Osa is going to be a massive part of this defense coming this year.
I think the defense, it's going to live and die by the D line. And it's also it's a big swinging defense. It's a defense that it hits a lot of homers, but it strikes out equally as much, which is like, especially in the cornerbacks. Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland are both excellent ball hawks. They also are 2 of the cornerbacks that when they're not getting interceptions, they get beat the most in the NFL. So it's Deron Bland allowed a ton of yards last year, ton of interceptions, ton of pick sixes. He had a good year. But when he's not getting those interceptions, it's usually going a long way to the other end of the field. And that's a big issue. And there's not a whole lot of other players to rely on. Like this linebacking core, lose Leighton Vander Esch to retirement. You bring in Eric Kendricks, but it is not a good linebacking core. It's the glaring hole on this defense. Everywhere else, if there's a hole, it's like the safeties aren't great, but Dominic Wilson, Malik Hooker are fine. You can live with that. The corners, when they're on, are great. The D-line is solid. The linebackers are very questionable.
Yeah, so to me, I would love to see DeMarvion Overshown get a ton of playing time this year. He didn't stay on the field last year. He was hurt. I like Eric Kendricks being like a mentor to him. I would love to see the 2 of them on the field together a ton. even if at the start of the season, Overshone's he's a little bit overmatched, he's a little bit slower out of the gate because he didn't play. He doesn't have the on-field experience right now, but having a veteran like Eric Kendricks, who's been at the top of the game for so long, it's going to help him out a ton. I think DeMarvion Overshone can be a massive part of this defense, but again, it's a big if, and that is the hole. If that hole can get filled, I think this defense can be really, really good like it used to be. If it can't get filled, you're relying on your corners to help out over the middle and a little bit shallower, and Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland. And when that happens, they just get beat over the top. We saw that happen against the Green Bay Packers in the playoffs, where they just got torched on essentially every single play that Jordan Love was throwing the ball against zone coverage.
Yeah, they're going to need guys to step up for a team that especially wants to win a Super Bowl, right? Somebody we haven't mentioned, Jordan Lewis, just want to give a little bit of a shout out to. I think he's a pretty solid third corner in the league. All right, well, we've given our thoughts now, so now it's the fun part. It's we've gone ahead and made predictions. We're going to be doing these at the end of every one of these previews. So let's see where we're at. Frosty, let's give you a bit of a break. You were going on a lot there. So let's go to Glover here and see where do you have this? How do you have this NFC East division shaking out?
All right, so I'll start at the bottom again, just like last time. And I mentioned this earlier. I may have underrated the Commanders a little bit in my predictions. I've got them going 3-14 again. I don't have them improving or taking a step. I have them just staying stagnant. And I think it's going to come down to a rookie quarterback playing behind a poor O-line. A lot of changeover on this team, and the defense, it's a lot of talent, but again, a lot of changeover. The new coaching system for all over the field for Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn is a defensive guy. How well is he going to mesh with the offense? How well is Cliff Kingsbury going to find a groove with Jane Daniels? That's going to take a while. That is really it's going to take a while. And they don't have a particularly easy schedule. The NFC East, they match up with the AFC North this year, or oh no, they have 2 games with the Bengals and Ravens though, and the Browns and the Steelers. They got the AFC North. That's not good. That's just not good for a team like the Commanders. So I do have them stealing one against the Steelers, but it is going to be a tough schedule. And again, you play the Cowboys and Eagles twice, despite the question marks surrounding those 2 teams we discussed. Still both very good football teams. So it's going to be a lot of growing pains for the Commanders, especially behind a weak O-line. It's a tough spot to throw your rookie quarterback into. Next up at third, I got the Giants, and I also have them having another rough year. I got them going 5-12. So I'm not very high on either of these teams. For this, it's just Daniel Jones sucks. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to try and hide it. I think he is terrible. I watch him play, and I dropped him in fantasy football because he's got the running upside. Okay, if he can get his arm down and see plays, he'll be great. He just isn't. He can't process the field at all. He makes bonehead decisions constantly. I can't get behind it. I can't support Daniel Jones as a starting quarterback in this league, especially with limited run game and a weak O-line and question marks in a young receiver room. Like, this offense is going to be rough, and the defense, as we mentioned, a lot of great pieces, a lot of pieces that are really not supposed to be where they are. So this team is taking steps, I think, but I don't think it's going to show so well on the record until Daniel Jones is on his way out. And I do think they'll be making that move soon, because that was a big talk of the draft, was potential for them trading up and moving Daniel Jones. But it's really not a great look when you sign a guy to a $40 million contract and the next season you're trying to move him. Good luck. Good luck getting rid of that contract. So we'll see. Then at third, it's a big jump up from here. It's the Cowboys 12-5. I think they will still be solid as the Dallas Cowboys. They don't disappoint in the playoffs. They'll do really great in the regular season, but the playoffs are when they disappoint. So I have them having a solid season. They're going to have a tough schedule. They're going to play a lot of teams in the division, but for the Eagles and Cowboys playing the interdivisions, that's not a bad thing per se. You get 2 against the Eagles or Cowboys or vice versa, but playing the Giants, playing the Commanders, those should be pretty straightforward wins. But again, drawing the AFC North is not good. The AFC North is a tough division to draw. That's going to be a battle for all 4 of those games. But I do think the Cowboys can run away with a couple of them. So we'll see how things shake out for them. I think there's a lot of room for some career years, and we always see contract year players have career years. Like CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons and Dak Prescott. It wouldn't shock me if they all have some of the best years of their careers, despite the question marks around them, simply because they're all nearing new contracts, and players always play at another level when they get money on the line. So That's why I got them at 12-5.
So what I'm hearing out of that is Micah Parsons DPOY, CeeDee Lamb Offensive Player of the Year, and Dak Prescott MVP.
I'm not gonna go that far. We'll pump the brakes on that a little bit. I mean, I like to think Kyle Hamilton's gonna have a DPOY year, but we'll get to that. We'll get to the AFC North in a couple episodes. But then top of the division, I've got the Eagles also at 12-5. They just got a tiebreaker and take the division there. Again, it's question marks for the Eagles, but I've got it. Basically, they're starting out hot as they always do, 6-1, and then a bit of a rough patch in the middle, ending the season also on a 5-game winning streak. But the Eagles are bound and destined to have a rough patch. That's just how the Eagles are. They go through, they're so streaky. They've been that way for the last few years under Jalen Hurts, under Nick Sirianni. Is when they're winning, and they look unbeatable, but then they'll start losing, and those losses tend to fall to get together, and they tend to pile up. So, they open 6-1, then lose 4 or 5, and then end 5-0. So that's kind of how I got that season shaking out for them. I think if a lot of the young pieces step up, like basically the Georgia Bulldogs from 2021 and 2022, that you get that Georgia Bulldogs team and they step up to the NFL level, they should be a really good team. I expect them to be led more by the defense, though, with all the question marks around the new O-line and the receiver room depth and Jalen Hurts in general. I think it'll be a lot on the defense to really dominate and take this team far.
All right, Frosty, are the vocal cords ready to go again? Let's
Oh yeah.
let's hear you wrap up, and what do you think the NFC East shakes out?
So I did not expect you to be that low on the Commanders. I'm not gonna lie.
That was a
I have
shock.
the
Oh, that was a
yeah.
shock.
That blew my mind. I'm low on the Giants. I have the Giants last in this division, going 2-15.
Oof.
I think this team is abysmal. Evidently, if somehow the New York Giants ever see this video, this is going to be played on repeat in their locker room for the entire season. We have there's been like 3 nice things said about the New York Giants in this entire time. I have them getting an upset win at home week 6 over the Bengals, and I have them beating the Commanders at home and splitting with them. I really don't see, other than the Carolina Panthers game, I don't really see very many games that they can win. Realistically, I don't put much stock into pretty much anything about this team. I can't trust it, and I can't trust Daniel Jones. I have him going 2-15, tied for the worst record in the league. In third place, I have the Commanders. I have them at 6-11.
Wow. Oh, I
think they take a step forward. Like you said, it's a surprisingly tough schedule for a team that had the 2nd overall pick. It's a surprisingly difficult schedule. Like I said, I have them splitting against the Giants. As a Cowboys fan, the Cowboys will have that game every single year. This year, I think the Commanders beat the Cowboys week 12. I think that's the Cowboys game where they just forget what sport they're playing, and the Commanders will come out at home that week. They'll beat them. I like Jaden Daniels. I'm not quite as high on Jaden Daniels as Wiles is, but I like this defense a lot. I know Dan Quinn's a good defensive mind. I think he can do a lot of good things with this defense. Second, I have the Cowboys. I also have them going 12-5. I've said all I need to say about this team. I feel like I'm just beating a dead horse at this point. It's just this team. It's up and down. You really don't know what you're going to get, and the offseason makes it seem like everything's pretty much going downhill at this point. And I think 12-5 shooting a little bit high, to be completely honest. I'm not sold on this team in the slightest, coming from somebody that watches every single game that they play. So I'm really not sold on it. I'm going 4-2 in the division, split with the Eagles and split with the Commanders. They also have a stretch in their schedule. I don't know how closely you guys looked at their schedule. From week 6 to 11, week 6 is the Lions, 7 is a bye, then it's San Fran, Atlanta, Philly, Houston. So they run a gauntlet right in the middle of the year. I just don't think that's going to go well for this team. I just simply do not. And that's right out of that is into that Commanders game that I think they're going to lose.
Funnily enough, I actually have them winning 4 of the 5 games in that stretch you just listed out. I do actually have them doing well in that stretch, but yeah, it's a tough time. It's not going to be easy for that.
No, it's not. And I'm a lot higher on the Falcons. I think than either one of you guys are. So I think the Falcons are a very, very good team, and I think they fit in that echelon there
I
with
like the
the rest of the
Falcons.
teams
I
that
like the
they're
Falcons too,
facing.
man. I like
They're-
the Falcons.
I like to. I'm not going to spoil what my record for them is. I like the Falcons a lot, though. I'm high on the Falcons. And then of course winning the division, I have the Eagles. I'm going 13-4. But I have been going 5-4 against teams with winning record. I think, like Logan, you mentioned that they were going to be streaky. I think Vic Fangio, as good of as a defensive coordinator as he is, I feel like if they start to get like blown out by teams, he will completely overhaul his entire scheme. I think he's the kind of guy that's built up the reputation that he can do that and nobody's going to bat an eye. Nobody's going to question anything. And I think that's going to help this team because what happened to the Eagles last year is San Fran leaked the script on how to beat them. And then everybody did the exact same thing. The Eagles made no adjustments and they couldn't win football games anymore. I think their new coordinators are going to help with that a ton. I think the Eagles team goes back to where it was before. I'm going 13-4, 5-1 in the division. The only division loss coming to the Cowboys in Dallas in week 10. Other than that, I'm going 8-0 against teams with a losing record. Like this Eagles team, I feel like there's too much talent on there for them to continually to lose games that they really have no business losing.
I like how there's a lot of variance between us for all these picks. Like for the last episode for the NFC North, we were relatively all on the same page. I think our win totals are different, but we relatively have everybody in the same order. I got the Commanders finishing last, kind of like you, Glover, but in opposite way. I feel like I might have made the record a bit too high. Well, you made the record a bit too low. I feel like Frosty kind of nailed it. I had them at 7-10, which I my thought process for that is I like the vets that come in, man. I think they're gonna help. I think the team got better. I don't know if they're 3 wins better, but I could definitely see them going like a 6-11 and a 7-10. Maybe I'm a bit too high, but if I could change it, I would switch it to 6-11. But I don't think they can get worse, Clever. I don't agree with them
Yeah.
being worse than last
You
year.
might be right. I do have them maybe a little lower than I thought. Like it was kind of just like I kept picking them to lose and I was going through the schedule. But for me, if you have them at 7-10 in last, what do you have the Giants at?
7-10.
I didn't even think of that. Okay,
So I have them both at 7-10. Um, Again, this Giants team got better. They got better. They lost Saquon, but overall the team got better. Like bringing in Brian Burns is nothing to sniff at. I think Malik Neighbors is awesome, and I think if somebody could help out Daniel Jones, it would be him. So we'll see. I might be a little too high on them as well, but I think they're better, and I think they can improve on their 6 wins that they had last year, especially if they stay healthy, which they weren't last season. So I have them both at 7-10. In third, I have the Eagles at 11-6. So I had them at 11-6. Glover, you had them at 12-5. Frosty had them at 13-4. I think we're all relatively in the same area on that. Don't know how much more explaining there is to do on the Eagles. You guys have summed it up pretty well. And then the Cowboys, I have them at 11-6 as well. I think they took a step down. So they finished 12-5 last year. You guys both met 12-5. I have them at 11-6. So I think the division is, I think the Giants and Commanders are close, and I think the Eagles and Cowboys are close. And I think it's just going to be a jockeying of those positions. But it's another division where every team is trying to take a step up and trying to really compete. Like you don't see like a team I don't see any of these teams vying for like the first overall pick, unlike where you guys both have a different team vying for the first overall pick.
Yeah. Yeah,
We'll see it later. But I got a lot of teams in that area. It's a very, there's a few teams vying for that first overall pick for me.
I don't have many, but I just the Giants had a better record with Tyrod Taylor and a better record with Tommy DeVito than they did with Daniel Jones last year.
He's not that good. And, maybe he finds this video and he listens to this as he goes to sleep about just us just ragging him. But I've watched him for 4 years now, and it's just still the same old Daniel Jones,
If he sees this video, I would be happy if he proved us wrong because I want Daniel Jones to be good.
I'm
But
kind of
man, I just don't believe it. I just don't believe it.
Yeah, I don't know what level he can eventually reach, but I think there's enough there. I love the D line there. And I like the younger guys that they have, and I think they can take steps. So 7-10, I feel like is a modest number for the Giants. 2-15 is wild, man. If I had 2-15 is kind of crazy to me, but it's weird because I can see it. Like I
Yeah.
could see just a collapse of them in a Giants way possible. So
Well,
it's
so
I can't
so
fault.
my thinking was realistically, I have them losing to the Vikings, Commanders, Browns, Cowboys, Seahawks, Eagles, Steelers, beat the Commanders, and they beat the Bengals in there. I have them upsetting the Bengals. They lose to the Panthers, Bucks, Cowboys again, Saints, Ravens, Falcons, Colts, and Eagles.
Not an easy
At most, to me, I think there's 2 games in there that they could win.
It's not an easy schedule. It's definitely not
No,
easy.
like that's like the AFC North is a tough division, like you said. Like that's probably the worst division that you could have drawn for these teams to play against. So
Oh yeah, and Mike Tomlin, as much as I hate him and I can't stand how annoyingly good he is, he doesn't lose to bad teams very often. The Steelers don't typically get upset a ton, so it's tough to see a team like the Giants pulling one of those out. But we'll see.
I will say, like for other games in there, like I could see them beating the Saints pretty easily, to be honest. Like I could see them beating. I'm not the biggest Browns guy. I don't like the Browns as
Wonder
much
why.
as people seem to
I
like the
just
Browns.
I think
Uh,
that D line just eats their offensive line alive.
The other thing with both the Giants and Commanders is they're so thin. Like if they get hurt, there's no depth on either of those teams. Like injuries happen, you know.
right? Exactly. Yeah.
So when someone gets hurt, because it's bound to happen unless you're just lucky, there's not going to be a lot to fill in those holes.
Well, I guess that about does it, guys. That's the NFC East in a nutshell. I like how there's a bit more conversation here where we have differing opinions for the podcast, right? Nobody wants to listen to us agree all the time. Any final thoughts, Glover? Any final thoughts?
Uh, I mean, I'm interested in this division because again, I just said it's two echelons. It's two teams vying for Super Bowl goals. That's their goals, and two teams that are kind of trying to find themselves. So it'll be interesting. But I'll tell you one thing: I have no faith in Daniel Jones. It's my closing note.
And Frosty, what do you want to wrap up with?
uh this has just been a Daniel Jones hate podcast at this point. Like you could take 20 minutes of this podcast and it could be just us just dissing Daniel Jones. It's been I'm not that low on Daniel Jones, but compared to the other quarterbacks in this division, I am.
17-15. What do you mean you're
Yeah.
not that low on Daniel?
He also doesn't have help. He has no run game. He's got no O line. He's got one receiver.
The team's a bit of a
I will say I think this division, I don't know if it's one of the best in football. I'm going to walk back what I said before. I don't know if it's one of the best. I think it's one of the most polarizing divisions in football. I think any one of these teams could go anywhere from like 5-12 to 13-4, and it wouldn't shock me really. Like these teams are just, if they're either going to show up and they're going to look like one of the best football teams in the league. There's been games where the Commanders and Giants have done that last year even.
Yeah.
And there's games where Dallas and Philadelphia have come out and look like last year's Carolina Panthers. Like these teams are they fluctuate so much. We could go 0 for 4, all three of us on these division predictions, and I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that seems like a good place to end it. Keep a lookout for the NFC South division, where that's an interesting division where I think pretty much every team is close except Carolina. And I think you could see 3 out of the 4 teams winning it. Maybe me and Frosty are high on the Falcons, so maybe that's a bit of a precursor to what we have coming down the pipeline. If you enjoyed the video, please like it. Don't forget to subscribe. Like we said at the top, it helps us grow and wants us to keep it going to provide better content for you guys. So thanks again for watching. Wiles, Frosty, and Glover all here. Keep it buzzing.